One of the worst things about the modern world is the disease of wokeness. Elon Musk referred to it as the woke mind virus. And for the most part, people who are woke go out of their way to be offended by everything. Even if said thing to most rational people isn't offensive at all. And if it is, often just adding context explains things. And one of the things that the people, the disciples of the Church of the Eternally Offended, love to do is look at things in history through a modern perspective in order to get them cancelled. And of course, that's ridiculous. Things change over time. Something which was offensive or is offensive to us now may have been absolutely fine as little as 5 or 10 years ago. For example, back in the 1970s, there was a TV show called Love Thy Neighbour. Now, when the 70s finished, I was only 2 years old, so I never saw this TV show when it was airing for the first time, as it were. It's never on TV anymore, understandably, but you can watch it online. Now, the basis for Love Thy Neighbour was a black family moved in next door to a white family, and every single episode is just the two husbands using racially offensive language and stereotypes towards one another. It is utterly vile, yet it is reflective of the time. Because back in the early 1970s, despite what Netflix may tell us, racial diversity was still very new in Britain. Up until the 1950s, almost everyone was the same colour as me, and those that weren't were probably soldiers for part of the British Empire. But then after World War II, Britain needed people, so it imported people from the then crumbling empire, and for the most part, that worked brilliantly. So this video was inspired by a question by one of my regular subscribers. Mate, I don't know your real name, but you know who you are. Who pointed me to a story which shows that wokeness has now spread to the British military, or military if you're watching in the New World. One of the RAFs, the Royal Air Force, that's important, Royal Air Force, one of its oldest squadrons, 14 Squadron, so I'm guessing it was the 14th Squadron, fairly simple, has been cursed by wokeness and has now abandoned its historical nickname. So, 14 Squadron were formed during the First World War, and they flew sorties over the Middle East. They were based in the Middle East for over 30 years. This is their emblem and their motto, which reads, "I spread my wings and keep my promise." But you can see it's in Arabic. That is a quote from the Quran, the Muslim holy book. And given that at the time, the RAF, actually they were called the Royal Flying Corps back then, would have been made up entirely of white Christian men. For white Christian men to adopt a motto from the Muslim holy book, I think shows massive respect to their hosts. The motto was suggested by Abdullah bin al-Hussein I, who at the time was the leader of Jordan. Also at the time, Jordan was part of the British Empire. The British Empire did a lot of very bad things. They also did some very good things. And Jordan was a protectorate, the irony being that the British turned up, basically said, this country's now ours, and anyone who doesn't like it can get shot. But don't worry, you're under our protection now from being invaded by foreigners. Yet the Brits also did good things. They brought electricity, running water, the railways, modern technology. The best example of the British Empire in action is India today. Now, India became independent in the late 40s or early 50s. I can't remember the exact date. But before the Brits turned up, it had just been a third world hellhole. Now, with British technology and their own advancing technology, India is one of the world's superpowers. They've got a fucking space program. Jordan was part of the empire until 1946, when the empire basically collapsed. It was an ally of the British in both world wars. So the nickname of 14 Squadron, which is now so offensive to the woke, was the Crusaders. The reason being, these were white Christian men operating in Muslim Middle Eastern countries. It was a bit of a joke, if nothing more. Of course, if you don't know your history that well, if you're not from the UK, the Crusades were wars between Christians and Muslims. For the most part, it was Christians trying to recapture Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is rather important in the history of Christianity. And at the risk of sounding a bit right-wing, and I want to stress I'm not right-wing, I'm just factually correct. Religious issues, shall we say, continue in the modern world between, say, Christians and Muslims, Jews and Muslims, Sikhs and Muslims, Buddhists and Muslims and slightly different Muslims. Thus, 14 Squadron is no longer called the Crusaders because of one complaint saying that that name could be offensive to Muslims. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think this is all Muslims. I think it's a hardcore elite who are offended by fucking everything. They're always the victim, never to blame. They're worse than fucking Scousers. Muslims may be offended by the name the Crusaders. My argument is this. For those Muslims, what aren't they fucking offended by? So let's say that some Muslims will be offended by the name Crusaders. Here are some things which offend me. Terrorism really gets on my tits. So do honour killings, little girls being married to men in their 50s, or little girls being molested by taxi drivers who all follow the same religion. I also think it's cruel that if an animal is to be slaughtered, that its throat is slit and it has to walk through its own blood. Now, I'm not being right-wing here, I'm just saying those things have no place in modern Western society. And I want to stress, this video isn't intended to be Islamophobic. It's intended to be realistic. Because, although I couldn't get the figures for the RAF or the Navy, in the British Army, there are currently around 450 Muslim soldiers. Brave men and women protecting our country. I take my hat off to them. Yet, on the British terror watch list, there are currently in excess of 40,000 Muslims. Doesn't that speak for itself? So I don't know, but I'm guessing that the vast majority of British Muslims wouldn't give a shit that 14 Squadron were known as the Crusaders. Because I think the vast majority of British Muslims wouldn't even know that 14 Squadron were called the Crusaders. And I say that because until about a week ago, I didn't know it. But more to the point, if we take British Muslims out of it, what about the rest of the Muslim world? Do you think the Saudis give a shit? Or the Iranians are looking at this story going, the RAF have removed the name Crusaders. All right, lads, stop trying to enrich the uranium. And like I said earlier, it's the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force. The head of the church, the defender of the faith, is the king. And although I believe 14 Squadron mostly fly transport aircraft, they are part of the British Armed Forces. The Armed Forces, whose job is to protect the British people. And if there are people who are hostile to us, our armed forces endeavour to kill them. Now, if you're a foreign aggressor, about to be blown to smithereens by a Storm Shadow missile fired from a Eurofighter Typhoon, I don't think you'd be that bothered about what nickname the squadron has. Wait, that's the end of this short, very angry video. If you enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as ever, thanks for watching. The worst things about the modern world is is my fucking hay fever. Flew missions in and around the Middle East during the First World War in, I think they were Bristol biplanes. And as a man who's flown a de Havilland Tiger Moth, I don't fucking know, I'm just trying to show off. World, there are tensions among the world's religions. Be it Christianity and Muslims, Jews and Muslims, Hindus and Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, there's fucking loads. But I couldn't think of any. Let's add some context.